This is the Be One Change One podcast, where our mission is to help listeners define values, practice integrity, and inspire change.
Our vision is to mentor men and empower them to achieve more by taking responsibility for shaping their own lives.
He's CAS, an evolving man who has been shaped by adversity and continues to grow through his imperfections.
And he's Roscoe, an imperfect work in progress that tries to suck less every day.
Between us, we have over 40 years of Air Force fighter pilot experience with countless hours as trainers, instructors, and mentors.
Join us and learn to take responsibility for your own life as we dive into subjects from leadership to resilience to vulnerability.
Be the one who changes their course. Be decisive, driven, and purposeful. Set the example for others. Lead. We wish we'd had this show when we were younger men.
Be the one.
You want to lead this one off, or you want me to?
I'll let you.
All right, cool. A couple weeks ago, I was listening to this podcast. Ed Milet is a guy that I know I've referenced him on the show before. Highly encouraged. If people have not visited his podcast, very uplifting, very encouraging, very positive man. Has a lot of really good guests with really good stories. The episode that I was listening to, I don't think it was titled this, but it sort of evolved into this discussion about DEI.
Okay.
And so I thought it'd be a good one. I don't think it's something that we've really talked about too much on the show.
No.
We've probably hit bits and pieces of it. You know, when
Maybe.
we talk, we get off on little political talks here and there, or we talk about, when we talk about opportunities and things like that. We talk about the military. We talk about merit. So I think we've talked a little bit about it in pieces, but I kind of wanted to go down this DEI rabbit hole for just a few minutes. And the thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to try really hard, Cass, to not make this political. So not really talking about DEI as policy, but just what it is and really kind of what it means. And if we want to talk policy and get into that a little bit at the end, that's fair game. But
sure,
I think this is one of those topics that can be very divisive. And
yeah, totally.
And it can really turn people off because, we all kind of have our jerseys on and we're going to root for that team, whichever side of this argument you're on. So let's just divorce that for a second and just let's try to look at it for what it is. Where does it come from? What is diversity, equity, inclusion?
Yeah.
And what does that really mean to us in our everyday, in our jobs and how it's good and how it's bad and things like that.
I think it's a really interesting topic, and I'll just start out by saying in no ways am I a domain expertise in DEI. So this was actually a good opportunity for me to actually do some research and actually try to get a better understanding of what it actually is. Because to be honest with you, dude, I haven't paid that close of attention to it because I don't see... It's not something that I deal with in my everyday life. You know what I mean? And that may not necessarily be true for a lot of other people, depending on what industry you may work in. And we can talk about some of the nuances of that. I don't think it's something that we probably, even if DEI had been a big thing when we were back in the military together, that's such a different environment that I don't know that those policies could, or, the attempt at implementing those types of policies could really apply to a fighter squadron. So, but with that said, I think it'll be an interesting conversation. And it was kind of fun to, dive into it a little bit and try to figure out what's really the crux of the issue.
Yeah.
And where does this tend to work, or where does it tend to fall apart? And what does it even mean? What's the intentionality behind it? And so, so I'll let you start, brother. I mean, I think that the first thing to understand is, like you said, let's define what it actually is. And then really, I think that from what I read, there's a big difference between kind of the theory of DEI and the intentionality behind it, and then what's actually happened when it's attempted to be implemented as policy.
Yeah.
So
I think that interpretation, once you turn it into policy, that's where it starts to turn. I'm going to use the word evil, but
well, I think
because it really is, man. Because now
there's some challenges definitely in that.
It doesn't matter which side you root for when you when you start to develop policy around this and start to make decisions around this, that's where you create judgment. It's almost antithetical to what DEI actually is.
Yeah, totally.
And we can have
You're
a really
100%
good
correct.
a really good conversation, I think, on reverse racism. And I don't know what the opposite of exclusion, I guess.
Well, I think what it leads to, what helps, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because we haven't even really defined what it is or kind of the theory and
you're talking like
practicality
we have a
behind
fucking plan to this stuff.
But yeah, right. But I think that's what it is. Like, the focus is actually on inclusivity, but what it actually does is it actually in practice can force some groups into solidarity or
Yeah.
even into, not engaging,
Mhm.
non-engagement, because they're so worried about the potentiality of offending someone or being mistaken that they
Yeah.
actually turn away instead of turning into, which is kind of the whole point of it, right? The whole point of it is to bring everybody together and understand, maybe our own hidden biases towards people
Mhm.
that we don't even recognize that we have, and things like that. So,
Yeah. Well, just look, I guess to get us started, what I did was I just typed into Google, what is DEI?
Yeah.
And I've really enjoyed. I'm kind of I'm a skeptic of AI. I try not to use it, but I have enjoyed this Google AI summary that they've started putting at the top of the pages now.
Yeah.
It saves me a lot of time.
Yeah.
And I can kind of get the 30,000-foot view on a
Yeah. You can
topic
get the
really
gist
quick.
of it.
So,
Sure.
with that, the very first thing is just a breakdown of the terms. So let me go through that real quick, and then we can break it out from there. So diversity, the presence of a wide range of different backgrounds, identities, or perspectives within a group or organization. It can include race, ethnicity, gender, age, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, veteran status, and more. All right. That's pretty, sounds pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Equity goes beyond simple equality to ensure that everyone has the resources and opportunities they need to achieve fair and successful outcomes. It means acknowledging that different people start from different places and require different levels of support. And I think that's something very important that we need to come back to.
For sure.
There's a couple of things just in that definition that I think we can break out a little bit. And
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So let's just leave that let's just earmark that for just a second. And then inclusion is the practice of creating an environment where everyone feels welcomed, respected, valued, and has a sense of belonging, involves intentionality, seeking diverse perspectives, and ensuring that all individuals can participate fully and have their contributions recognized.
Yeah.
So just the definitions, sounds kind of warm and fuzzy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's also important to recognize is this was developed for business. And the reason, from the research that I did, the reason that this was developed for businesses in particular is because there's a net cost associated with losing people inside of your own corporation. And one of the best examples, or an example that I'll use, is one that I heard, where, like, let's say you have a mid-cap sized organization, right? And you have, on average, your employees are making $100,000 a year. If, as people move up the ladder, like, and I'm just going to use this as an example because it's an easy one to do, but let's just use gender as an example, or sex as an example. As people move up the ladder, if you've got, let's say, at the entry level of your organization, about, let's say it's made up of 55% women, okay? But then as you move up, you start to lose those, that starts to shift, right? And now you have more men than women in those higher echelon positions. And let's say, it shifts to middle management by 10%. Well, if you're losing 10% of females a year, that's roughly a loss of like $10 million to a corporation, right? And so the whole intention behind this is because of the time that you invest to train, you know, the knowledge base that somebody who's been in the organization brings, you know, and then having to kind of retrain that or redo that over and over and over again, there's costs associated with that. And they've determined that it's like, I don't know, I can't remember what the number was, but it was like, you know, I don't know, $10,000 or $100,000. Maybe that was the $100,000 of investment that you have to put back into retraining somebody and getting somebody back up to speed. So it's roughly a net loss of about $10 million to the organization. And so the whole idea behind this was, let's make sure that we're creating environments that allow people the same opportunity towards resources and stuff like that, so that if they want to make that advancement, and then also recognize maybe any internal biases that we may have and kind of eliminate that stuff so that everybody's kind of on a level playing field. And then maybe we won't see those losses as much, right? And that'll actually be a savings to the organization or to the corporation. That was kind of the intent behind it, I believe. From what I read.
Well, I went back maybe a step further from that, and I wrote down here where you said this started in business, and I don't disagree with that. Maybe we need to just go back one more step, and where did this really come from? In my opinion, and from what I've gathered, it came from the Civil Rights Act of '64.
Yeah, well, it's a social science theory.
Right. Well,
that I think evolved from some of that.
Yeah, when you talk about DEI specifically, but what did the Civil Rights Act of '64 really do is it prevented discrimination based on a lot of the things that we identified in that paragraph about diversity, specifically race, gender, ethnicity, where you grew up, what language you speak, all that kind of stuff. And then Title VII sort of prohibits any discrimination. That's where you get equal opportunity. And that was the big buzzword, like for so many years, that was the big thing. I think when we were kind of coming up and coming through was EEO, right? Equal opportunity. Yep. And then that sort of evolved into DEI, which is, I don't know, maybe just a new buzzword for the same thing. I really don't know.
I think it's a little more specific than EEO. I mean, the whole point of DEI isn't to be like affirmative action. But in implementation, a lot of times, that's exactly what ends up happening.
Yeah, and that's the policy side of it, right?
There's a focus on diversity and not necessarily the equity or the inclusion piece. Yeah. There's just, and I think one thing that's hard about DEI in practice is it's not really qualitative. It's not really quantitative. It's very qualitative. It's hard to measure, right? It's hard to measure if you're creating a more inclusive environment. It's hard to measure.
It's very subjective. Yeah.
It's very subjective.
Yeah.
So if you're a person that's in charge of a DEI program and you want to prove that there's validity to it, but it's not quantitative and there's not aspects that you can clearly define on how it's improving culture or inclusivity or equality. What happens oftentimes is people focus on the diversity piece. And then it just becomes this statistical numbers game of, okay, well, how many people do we have that are this race or this gender or
exactly
this, and that's where
we got to meet quotas and that kind of stuff.
And that's really where I think, that the train comes off the rails a little bit because that's not really the intention.
Well, you lose the focus of the intent, right?
Exactly.
And that, I think that happens. That's so common too, when you're dealing with a big problem. And it really doesn't matter what profession you're in, but when you're dealing with a big problem, maybe you get focused on so much of the nuance that you miss the big picture.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen recent examples of this when the new administration came in January and they started swinging a big axe. I think we lost I think there were things that were missed at lower echelons that weren't the intent of some of the policies that were put out. And again, I mean, this is the slippery slope. This conversation very quickly goes to policy, and
it does.
And so I'm trying to keep the ship steered.
No,
so
it's
just
okay,
talk about what it is.
I think that's important to point out, though, right? Is oftentimes things are great in theory, but implementation is not that easy.
Very difficult,
right?
Yeah,
and if you think about it too, like implementation for something like this can be very difficult too, because you have people from various backgrounds. And you have to have a group of people that are
Mhm.
actually willing to have a little self-reflection and maybe have a little empathy
Yeah.
and actually really take a hard look at, hey, what is the messaging that I've had in my life? And do I have some internal biases that I may need to correct? Because let's be honest, there are people that are, you know, homophobic, transphobic, racist,
Sure.
and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, those people exist in our society, and they always will. And so, trying to force everybody to reckon with that stuff through training can be difficult. You may not
Yeah.
have the audience that you necessarily want. Everybody may not be willing. I mean,
Mhm.
dude, we've had this debate about pronouns forever in our culture and in our society, right? But that's part of this, right? Is just having some respect and recognizing that somebody may prefer a different pronoun, but people get butthurt around that stuff, or they get it bends them out of shape. And so I think things often get lost in the implementation. And theories are always great, but they're not always practical.
Yeah, that's true. And I think really at its core, it's really comes down to the difference of something like this. Like, I have to hire Cass because he's gay. Or the flip side of that would be, I'm not going to withhold a job offer to Cass because he's gay.
That's more important
That
in the DEI
that
construct,
that
I
to
think.
me, I think would be the difference, right? Is
Yep.
just on if you're dictating to a corporation who and what categories of people,
Yeah.
and regardless of which category it is, because we saw this back, I think it was like the late 90s, early aughts, something like that. California was a big, they had this big, what was it, what was the
I
time?
don't remember
It
what the
was,
prop number was, but
oh gosh, but yeah, it was the affirmative action stuff, right? Like, you
yeah.
have to hire this many of this ethnicity and da 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 da, and you have to check all these containers and meet all these quotas and stuff. And I think we've just proven over time that that's really not the best business model.
Yeah.
Because you're really, I mean, corporations, businesses, employers are looking for the best people, not necessarily the people who fit into certain containers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I saw this meme that just really, you would have been proud of me. This is an exercise in just scroll past, dude. But this one really actually irked me a little bit. It was a picture of an airline cockpit with two African American pilots turned around facing the camera with these big grins on their face, and somebody snapped the picture, right? One of them happened to be a female. And the caption said, "When I walk onto an airplane and I see two black pilots, I'm so happy because I know that those two pilots overcame so many obstacles to get into that cockpit." And while that's not true, or while that's not untrue, I should say, the way that it was phrased was because they're two black pilots, somehow they had to overcome more. Not knowing anything about their backgrounds, not knowing anything about the way they grew up. I mean,
Yeah.
those two people could have grown up in upper middle class families, gone to really good colleges, graduated from Embry-Riddle with a couple thousand flight hours. Like, you have no idea. You're judging them just by the color of their skin and the fact that they're sitting in an airline cockpit. And you're probably, in your mind, you're making this correlation with, because they're black, they're underprivileged, and somehow they overcame this mountain of obstacles to get into that cockpit. And I just think that that's false. I think that's a false argument. I think, A, we don't know enough, and B, you're making something out of nothing, right?
Yeah. Well, I would
Because
agree with you.
anyone that sits in that freaking cockpit overcomes a mountain of fucking obstacles.
That's true.
Anyone. It doesn't matter what ethnicity.
Yeah. Well, this gets into a whole structural racism conversation that we don't necessarily need to have right now. And that's probably the baseline assumption for something like that. But I agree with you that, not knowing fully what the backgrounds of those individuals are, it's hard to make that assessment. On the flip side, I think it was Tucker Carlson who said, if he walks onto an airplane and sees a black pilot, then he's probably not going to take the flight because DEI, he's there because of DEI, not because he's qualified.
Yeah.
Which is absolute bullshit on the other side of the argument
100%.
too, right? Because we all have to have the same qualifications. You have to get the same ratings. You have to get. We all go through the same training.
Yes.
There's a standard that we're all held to. And so don't worry about it, people, when you get on an airplane. It's everybody's
Everybody meets the
qualified to be
same
in that
benchmarks
seat.
to get
That's
to that
right.
seat. Exactly.
Yep.
It doesn't
That's right.
matter. It doesn't matter where you came from. Now I'm not going to discount that some people have greater struggles early on. Like there may
Oh,
be
sure.
a kid who's growing up in poverty and really wants to be an airline pilot. And man, that's a tough road to hoe,
Yeah.
to get there.
There's a lot of costs associated.
You're going to need some money. You're going to need
there's a lot
you're
of
going to
costs
need some,
associated.
you're going to need a couple of handouts or hands up to get you into a position where you have opportunities. And that's a good segue, I think, Cass, into the next one here down under equity, right? And
well, did you want to go through each one first, or do you want to just jump around?
Dude, again, you're acting like I have a fucking plan here. I just like to talk and tell stories, bro.
Okay.
Do you have a plan?
We can talk equity, because I think equity is. I think there's some misperceptions about what equity is supposed to mean, from what I understand in theory, and how it's been exercised in practicality. And this is really where I think there's a lot of issue when it comes to policy implementation and the conversations that we hear from the right side and the left side over DEI. So go ahead.
Well, I was just going to go back to the definition that Google told me and say ensure that everyone has resources and opportunities.
Yeah.
This is and this is the way that I think about it. When I think about equity, I don't think about it in terms of equity of outcome. I think of it in terms of equity of opportunity, right?
Yes.
And if you're afforded the same opportunities as everyone else, well, now the ball's in your court, bro. And you have to control the things that you can control. And this is why I like this. And this is why I think this really pertains to our show and our universe, and the way that we frame things here is controlling what you can control, right? And if you're afforded an opportunity to go to a 4-year school and you choose not to, well, then you can't bitch about the things that you don't get in life that would have been afforded to you if you did go to a 4-year school.
Yeah, and I think this is where in the research that I did, it got a little bit confusing, because some of them reference the equity of opportunity and some state equity of outcome. And what I garnered from that, first of all, if it's equity of outcome, then it's right the fuck out in my mind. Because
my
you can't guarantee an equitable outcome. And I know that and this part was confusing to me too, because some of the stuff I read, it was like, yeah, this is all about taking away meritocracy, right? So merit-based systems to a certain extent. But to me, that's so fallible, because everything's, I mean, we live in a merit-based society. You get promoted. You would hope people get promoted because of, their work. I mean, obviously, a lot of times relationships play a part, who plays a part, right? But people typically that are promoted to positions are there because they've done the work, they put in the time, they've demonstrated a certain level of performance, and things like that. And so the majority of what I read, but I can also see how the idea of, it's almost like the defund the police, right? Like it's worded so poorly for what some of the intentionality was behind it, right? It's so bad, right? Like, it's just, could you have done anything dumber? Well, but seriously, right? It's like the dumbest fucking thing for what the intentionality behind it really was, to a certain extent. And I'm not saying I'm in favor of that or anything like that, but I think a lot of times, from what I gathered from the research I did, and again, I'm not an expert in this at all, in some respects, I think when they say equity of outcome, that what they really mean is equity of opportunity. They want people to have the same opportunity to have that outcome. And you do that by creating environments where the same training is available to all the people at the same level, right? The same opportunity to move up the scale is available to all people of all at every level, or any sex, any sexual orientation, any race, all of those things, right? When you go back to the diversity piece, all of those little sub things that you talked about, all those people have that same opportunity to get the same potential outcome. It doesn't guarantee that everybody's going
to Title VII.
It doesn't mean that everybody's going to get to that outcome. but
Yeah.
everybody has the same opportunity to, right? So you provide the additional training that somebody may need.
Right.
We talk about this all the time, dude. Figure out your strengths and weaknesses. And if you're weak in certain areas, figure out ways to improve, or
Mhm.
find something that focuses on your strengths, right? And what the intention behind this is to create, a culture, a training program, a profile that allows everybody the same opportunities to continue to excel.
Yeah. But I think, and I shouldn't say but, forget that I said but. I think when you talk about it in terms of outcomes versus opportunities, in my opinion, those two things are very, very different, right?
Yeah.
And you made a comment there where you said you can't guarantee an equitable outcome. I think there's been an attempt to, and that comes in the form of quotas, and that comes in the form of lowering standards and things like that. And I have a few examples that I'll cite just from my personal life where that conversation happened. But I think when you start talking about outcomes and opportunities, if you promise to people, or if you advertise to people an equitable outcome for whatever the endeavor is, you start to create a false expectation, I think, in that person's brain, and that is going to affect when he has when this person maybe has some sort of promise, or promise of an outcome because of these factors. You could run into a situation where he doesn't give as much effort, and he doesn't go all in on these things because he knows. He's like, well, I mean, I'm a gay man, so I'm gonna get the job. I'm not worried about that, or I'm gonna make the cut because I'm Chinese or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So now you're affecting expectations, which ultimately affects effort, which ultimately affects ability down the road, right? One of the examples that, and I'm pretty sure I've told this story on the podcast, so I'll keep it brief, but it's we had these really deep discussions back in, I think this was like 2010, 2011, 2012 timeframe. And it was sort of right on the cusp of when all this stuff was starting to kind of boil up, right at the end of the Obama era, and kind of moving into like, what's the next generation of politics going to look like? And then how's that going to trickle down to society, and how's it going to trickle back up to politics, and blah, blah, blah. And so there was this big push for females in the TACPs, tactical air control parties, battlefield airmen, guys who are going out there humping up and down hills, living in foxholes, eating MREs, shooting bad guys, calling in airstrikes, shit like that, right? This big thing about females getting into it, because it had been up to that point all male, an all male career field, right? And I don't know, I'd be wrong if I confidently said that there was a regulation that prevented females. I think this was more of females just weren't applying to it, or they couldn't make the cut. More research required on that one. But for the purpose of the conversation, this thing popped up, right? And so we spent a lot of time in meetings talking about this. And I remember very clearly sitting in this meeting with a bunch of 06s and 05s, and they asked me for my opinion because I was on the ground level, man. I'm the dude who I was the flight commander. I was the brigade air liaison officer. I was the guy that was going to lead 30 people downrange into combat, right? And my answer to them was like, I don't care. I really don't care.
Yeah.
The locker room is the locker room. That's another discussion, right? You start getting a bunch of bros in the locker room after a good workout in the morning, and shenanigans happen. I'm just going to leave it at that. Beyond that, my stance was you cannot lower the standard.
Yeah.
You cannot lower the fucking standard, right? If you lower the standard, what it does, that has ripple effects on the battlefield now. And I know that that special operations has gone round and around with this, right? Remember all the way back to G.I. Jane and that movie with Demi Moore in it, right? This conversation has been going on for years, decades, right? You cannot lower the standards, because what it comes down to is when I'm in a foxhole and bullets are flying, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that 10 dead hang pull-ups and 100 push-ups can pull me out of that foxhole. Yeah. I don't know if you lower the standards. I don't know if that works, right? And that's where I kind of drew the line. And that goes back to the inclusion piece of it, where you're talking about opportunities and outcomes, right?
Yeah, for sure. I'm sorry, were you done with what you were saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Sorry,
think
rant
another
complete.
good example of that I saw in my research where this has kind of gone off the rails a little bit is really in the academic realm, right? So when we start talking about college admissions and college institutions,
Oh yeah,
so
we got to
and
have so many of this
yeah, right. And so,
type.
and
Yeah, yeah.
again,
Okay.
the focus becomes on this diversity piece of it, right? And Scott Galloway, who I watched a video that he had on this, said that when Harvard allows or accepts the Taiwanese daughter of a billionaire to the school, that's not diversity, right? Just because you've got an Asian American billet filled, like that's not diversity, right? Like, and what's happened, I think, in a lot of the college institutions is that focus on the D, right? Is this focus on how many people of different varying backgrounds do we have that we're allowing into our school, right? When really, like, the focus of education should be, if we want to throw a wide swath across things, is really the only thing that should matter is one color, and that's green. And that's how many kids are you taking from that are disadvantaged from a money perspective, but have the qualifications to go to your school because they're really smart, and allowing them to attend one of those universities, right? And so I think that's where a major focus has been, and kind of where things have gone off the rail, because those DEI programs at a lot of these bigger schools have gotten really big. And again, it's not something that you can measure very well. But, hey, dude, if you're the head of the DEI department and you're making $400K a year, how do you stay in, and this is part of the problem too, is human nature, right? How do you stay in power? Well, you got to show that you're doing something, right? And so what happens? You start measuring that D piece of it, and the E and the I, which are really the more important pieces of the implementation of it, but are also way more difficult to measure, fall by the wayside. So, but I agree with you, man. Like, and I think that's too why, like, we probably weren't as exposed to it, because there's just the environment that we grew up into. There was a very specific standard, and if that standard was met, nobody cared, as far as I knew. It was just, do you meet the standard or not, right?
Well, that was kind of the military way, though, right? I mean,
yeah,
the military, as long as I've been around it, and I've been around it for nearly 30 years at this point, it's merit-based, bro.
Yeah, but I will also tell you that you and I have lived most of our adult life in an environment like that. That environment doesn't exist in a lot of businesses, or a lot of, culturally in business, right? When you're doing middle management, when you're doing entry-level work at a Fortune 500 company, I don't think that there is, you may get performance reviews or things like that, but I don't think it's as clearly delineated as far as, hey, dude, this is the standard in the squadron, or this is the standard in the workplace. We expect you to do X, Y, and Z. Like, I don't think it's that clear for people. Yeah. Does that make sense? So
it does, and it may not be a fair comparison. I mean, this is what makes this so freaking difficult, dude. It's very nuanced. You can't throw a blanket over it, because in the example that you were just talking about, we talked about the military, we talked about Fortune 500 companies. We didn't talk about a construction crew in Phoenix.
Yeah,
we didn't talk about the guys who were coming out here doing my landscaping. We didn't talk about the concrete pourers.
But just to go back to that 30,000-foot view, like, I think the intentionality behind this is, especially like in the hiring process, if we're going to use that as an example, or an admissions process for a school, right? The whole idea behind DEI, from what I could gather from what I read, was you want to cast the widest net possible. You want to make that position, that admissions position, you want to open it up to as many varied backgrounds as possible, right? So that you can have, because let's be honest, I think personally, there's value in diversity. I think, when you have a more diverse organization, and you have people that come from different backgrounds with different viewpoints, and that see the world through different lenses, like, that can help you make really good decisions, right? Because that's where you can catch potential. Maybe you can trap errors that you wouldn't see because you don't see things the same way that other people do, right? Um, there's a better discussion that goes on as opposed to if everybody's just kind of cut from the same cloth or the same background or the same educational background, this, that, and the other, right? So there's value to diversity in that sense. And that's kind of from what I read, that's kind of the intentionality behind it. But again, how do you measure that? How do you measure whether or not your net's wide enough? How do you measure whether or not you've, been able to reach people that you wouldn't have reached otherwise to give them notification that, this job position was open? Like, it's just very difficult to do.
Yeah,
and then
I don't disagree with that.
The other big piece of it was, I think, the intentionality behind it when it comes to the inclusion piece. And this is where you can start talking like microaggressions and all of this stuff, right? But it's that having an opportunity to figure out maybe what your own internal biases are, so that you can move away from that stuff. And that's supposed to increase inclusivity, right? Make people feel welcome, make people feel comfortable, all that kind of jazz. So, but again, very difficult to execute in practice, because not everybody's willing to do those things, and not everybody's in a place. Maybe, if you're very cognitively rigid and you've lived in a world that everything's black and white, right and wrong, yes, no, good, bad, that may be very difficult for you.
So, well, it's hard. I think it's hard when anytime you put a group of people together. Let me back up. I literally just had this conversation with a guy on Friday. I went in to this guy's office and we were having a conversation. It started with there's a potential to have a problem with one of my guys. And without getting too deep into it, he sort of brought it on himself because he's maybe not the most pleasant person to work with. All right. Negative energy. I'll leave it at that. This conversation that I was having with this guy, though, quickly devolved into analyzing the social dynamics of our workspace. Now here's what I'll say, right, is let's look at this as diversity and equity just for a second, right? I work in a workspace where every single person is college educated. Every single person has every person has met the benchmark of, let's call it 1,000 hours and a high time instructor fighter pilot. Many of them are mission commander level. Many of them are weapons school level. I mean, we're talking like the top of the game, right? Experience wise. They also all happen to be white. They all also happen to be male, right? But in this conversation that I'm having with this guy, the things that we're talking about are problems that you would see in kindergarten and middle school. You know, like, well, Cass has the blue crayon and I really want the blue crayon. So I'm going to go shit in Cass's cereal to get the blue crayon, and it's so even at this level, right? And by the way, when you look at it as a DEI thing, that has nothing to do with excluding anyone. These are the qualifications to get this job. If you meet it, you are invited to do an interview. If you don't meet it, you're kindly asked to apply somewhere else. That's it, right? And the fact that it's all male and all white people has nothing to do with excluding anyone. It happens. It just happens that is the demographic that applied for and got the job.
Dominated field.
That's it. We have never. So I've been there 7 years, and not once has a female or anyone other than a white male applied for that job. So, I mean, and I can't imagine any of the Bobs up the chain. I can't imagine any of them sitting there and going, well, this is a female. We really can't hire her. How's she going to fit into the team? How are the guys going to accept her? I just can't imagine that conversation happening, because we're professionals. We're grown-ups. We're all 40 and 50 somethings. Like, we're grown ass men. We can handle this. You think, right? But then on the flip side of that same coin, we're over here arguing about Cass has the blue crayon, and I really want the blue crayon.
Yeah,
It's
right.
dumb, right?
Yeah.
So social, you're never going to get away, I think, from the social dynamics of it. Anytime you put a group of people together, there's always going to be judgment. There's always going to be ire towards another person. There's always going to be haves and have-nots within that group. There's always going to be this I want the toys, not because I really want the toys, but because I just don't want you to have the toys. There's always going to be that, man. That goes from kindergarten all the way up to a professional environment that I work in.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't disagree. What do you want to attack next?
Well, we haven't really talked about inclusion too much.
Okay.
We sort of hit on it, but this one to me is a kind of an easy one, right? Is if you're in a space, it doesn't even have to be a workspace, but if you're in a space with someone who isn't like you, it's incumbent upon you to treat that person fairly, like they belong. And sometimes it's very difficult, right? Like when the new guy walks into the space, it could be your Friday night pickup basketball game, it could be your workspace, whatever. It's very difficult, I think, to just accept. It's very difficult for me. I shouldn't say this for everyone. It's very difficult for me to accept a lot of things at face value. I usually look for some proof of evidence that you belong there. I think is probably the right way to say that. Now, on the same token, or on the same side of that coin, if it is the Friday night basketball pickup game, I've gotten to where I sort of step back and I look at like, well, why are we here, right? We're here to have fun, and we're here to get some exercise, right? And it really doesn't care if it's a little fat kid,
sure,
right? Whatever. I mean, he's not going to run the court like we run the court, but he's having his version of fun, right? So who am I to fucking throw him the ball, see what happens? He might make one.
Yeah. So the inclusion piece to me is more of the culture you want to build, right? So like diversity's more of the practice that you may have, maybe in selecting and hiring. Equity is, the decisions that you make as an organization from like a training perspective to give people the same opportunities to promote and to advance, right? And then inclusion is the culture you want to drive. That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah,
how it breaks down for me in my mind. And that's the point, right? The point is that you just make everybody feel like they're welcome, valued, and supported as a valuable member of the organization. And the intention behind it is to create an environment where you can have open and honest conversations, right? You can have conversations and disagree with each other and not hate each other for it. And you can make sure that you do things that allow people to feel seen and supported in that. And I think any good manager would attempt to do those things. Or you would hope. Obviously, evidently it doesn't happen. But so that's kind of how I read inclusion, or the driving force behind inclusion.
Well, I liked earlier when you were talking about just from an employer standpoint, all of these things, not one in particular, but all of them together, man, that can really up your game in a lot of ways.
It could.
And it doesn't even have to be like, well, I would say it shouldn't be an intentional thing where you say, well, I really need to hire a female into this position.
Yeah.
However, I will say this, though, that let's say that you, I'll use Ed Milet again as an example. And one of the things that he was talking about in this podcast was he goes, I got like 15 businesses that I run, right? And over half of them, the person who runs that business for me is female. And it's really enlightening when you sit down with someone from a different gender, a different race, a different background. And like you like to say, stay curious, right? Ask questions, try to get in their mind. Like when I'm writing, even I'm writing a character, and it happens to be a female character, and I want to know. Like I wrote this line in one of my drafts. I wrote this one where my character is getting snatched out of bed by a kidnapper, and he tells her he's got his hand over her mouth and he's right in her face with a gun, and he says, "Get up and get dressed. We're leaving in 2 minutes." And in the original draft, she gets up and she has like this internal dialogue where she's deciding whether or not to put a bra on. And I gave it to Katie to read it, and she goes, "No female would ever be thinking about that. You got a motherfucker pointing a gun at. Like, that's the last thing on my mind is whether or not I'm going to put a bra on, or are my panties sticking out. I don't give a shit, right?"
Yeah.
And so getting that perspective from a female on female issues was invaluable. Right.
Yeah.
And my draft would have sucked. It would have not met its potential if I hadn't sought out that other perspective on things.
Yeah, and that's a great example of the value of diversity, right? And that goes in, like, if you want to talk some pros and cons, that's one of the pros, right? Is that
for sure,
diversity can lead to all kinds of different things, especially from a business perspective. One of the pros that I read was the increased innovation and creativity, because when you have diverse teams, you get a broader range of perspectives and experiences. You bring different ideas to the table. And that just leads to more creative problem solving. And in some ways, innovation to a certain extent, right? Because people see the problem set differently and ways to attack it differently, Another one that they talked about was improved financial performance. So diversity in leadership typically leads to stronger financial outcomes. They referenced a McKinsey study of 1,000 companies, found that the companies with the highest executive team diversity were 36% more likely to outperform on profitability. Better talent attraction and retention when you cast that bigger net. And I think it depends on, obviously, there's a lot of generalities to some of these statistics. But if you're in the AI business, you want to, there's a lot of smart people all over the world, from varied backgrounds, and the broader you throw that net, the better talent you're going to attract, right? So you get some of that. Enhanced decision making research indicates that diverse teams make better decisions majority of the time because they avoid the groupthink and challenge assumptions and other people's points of views. So that was some of the pros. Some of the cons was, like we've talked about, like the implementation failures and tokenism that can go on. Companies end up focusing on the D and not the E and the I. And, so it becomes vanity metrics. How do we look to the public? Are we as diverse as we need to be when people look at our balance sheet? Which leads to hiring quotas rather than addressing systemic issues that may exist about, internal biases that exist in the company. And don't really create that inclusive culture. The training that goes along with this. How do you, it's some studies have suggested that diversity training can be ineffective and backfire, right? Because if you're sitting there, like I saw this one video, dude, I couldn't even believe it. This gal's leading this DEI conversation. And it's she's basically sitting there basically telling everybody that's white, you're a racist and you're going to be a racist for the rest of your life. Okay, well, and the whole microaggression thing, I don't know if you read anything on microaggressions, but I can see the smirk on your face. But we can have these, they call it microaggression. But what it basically is go back to your locker room talk thing, right? So you may be in an environment where it's really comfortable to go, use a slur word, or, I mean, think about how just vernacular has changed since we were kids, when you were growing up, you probably heard it. And, but what would we, if you were fixing something on the fly, what would you call it? If you were, like when I was growing up, and I'm not, I don't want to use the term on the podcast, but like you may have the background you grew up in. There may be certain things that you say that were always acceptable, but depending on the diversity of the group that you're with, those things might not be that could be hurtful to somebody. Something that a derogatory term, a slur, a slang word that you don't even think is really derogatory slur or slang, because you just haven't had that. You've never been challenged on it or been in an environment where it wasn't acceptable, right? That's what they mean by microaggressions, right? So the intention behind that is to try to bring a little more awareness maybe to the words you use and, how you speak to people and some things like that, right? But what can often happen in some of these things is, people get so focused on, oh my God, am I going to say the wrong thing? That they just decide not to say anything at all.
Yeah.
And that's not the point, right? You're not driving inclusion if people are afraid to say anything at all because they might offend somebody.
That's the opposite extreme. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's where I think, it becomes in people's minds this zero-sum game. Like, right, where, oh, well, I'm a white male, so I can't say anything to anybody anymore because because I'm the protagonist. Anything I say is going to be taken the wrong way. And so I'm just not going to say anything at all. That's not, and that's where I think it starts to feel to people like reverse discrimination. So, again, it's so nuanced and it's difficult to do, right? And again, you have to have an audience that's willing to, one that's capable of being a little reflective, and let's be honest, not everybody is. But two, that's willing to, try to make those changes or have a little more awareness in the present moment than they have ever maybe had to in the past. And those things can be difficult to do. They talk about potential for division if it's not handled carefully. Focusing on differences can inadvertently reinforce stereotypes or create division. In undermining meritocracy, some critics contend that certain DEI practices, such as considering identity as a plus factor in admissions or hiring, can compromise a meritocratic system, and that the emphasis should be on equality of opportunity, not equity of outcome, which we already talked about.
Yep.
And so, again, I think that in theory, it's great. In application and implementation, it's very difficult to do.
Yeah, and that's what makes it such a touchy subject, right? Is ultimately what happens is you end up you almost have to pick a side. And then what we've seen recently, I call it in the last, I don't know, maybe 5-7 years or so, we've seen in society, there's not a lot of people who are just kind of in the gray in the middle on this. You're sort of extreme one way or another. And that's unfortunate too, because I think you hit the nail on the head, man, you get people from eclectic backgrounds, and holy crap, man. I mean, the innovation that can come out of that, a difference of backgrounds, not even race and gender and ethnicities and things like that, but just a different background. Like you and I are college educated white males in our, slightly above, right around 50 years old, right? With, 5 decades of experience. But I grew up in a very different environment than you grew up, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, if you try to like silo either one of us into these categories, you're missing the forest for the trees here in a lot of ways, right? And that's one great thing I think about the military is, they're called uniforms for a reason, right? We all look the same, we all act the same, we all kind of carry ourselves generally the same. We all have the same standards that we have to meet to get there. Like if you don't meet the standards in basic training, you don't become an airman, period. It doesn't matter what you look like or where you came from or what what kind of shampoo you use. Nobody gives a shit. You have to meet the standard, right? If you're flying an airplane and you do not meet the standard, you're going to bust that flight. You bust enough flights, you're going to fly something else, or you're going to end up in a mission planning cell somewhere. Like there is a standard, and you have to meet it. And how many female fighter pilots do we know?
Not a lot.
Like it's not that deep of a pool.
No, it's not.
I will say though that every single one that I know met the standard. She got there because she wanted to be there. She was afforded an opportunity. She took it.
Yep.
She earned her position. And many of them have had very, very, like they've climbed the ladder.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can go into a whole glass ceiling conversation and all that stuff. And then I would reference people back to a few episodes ago. We did the Dirty Jobs episode, and we sort of touched on this in that episode when we were talking about there's a lot of career fields out here that are predominantly female. There are a lot of career fields that are predominantly male. Now, if you tried to throw a DEI blanket over either one of those, you're probably not going to get a better outcome out of it. I'll use the example of a construction crew, right? One of my sons works on a construction crew. If you started having to hire females into that construction crew by some decree from the government or some proposition that passed or whatever, well, who's to say that these females are going to be able to actually do the job? Like, how many jobs out there, blue collar jobs, one of the requisites is you have to be able to lift 50 pounds. That right there cuts out a lot of people. And unfortunately, some of those are going to be female, right?
Yeah. Men too, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, men too. But I mean, and I don't want to get into this whole, because that's a whole nother discussion. Maybe we can have this someday. You and I would have to pregame on this one a long time. But this idea that's come up recently in the last few years of you identify as something else, and then therefore you can enter their sports and things like that, right? Joe Rogan has this really good example that he had talked about this a guy. He was a man for like 32 years, and then decided that he was a female and went into the octagon with a bunch of girls and just beat the shit out of them. Right?
Yeah.
I'm not okay with that. I'm sorry. I'm not okay with that. Right. And that's not a slight on you of what you want to identify. I don't care if you want to identify as a fucking frog on the weekends and go hop around your neighborhood. I don't give a shit. But when it comes to stuff like that, that's where I think DEI has gone a little bit too far.
Yeah. Well, and I think, some of this stuff is just things that we're having to grapple with culturally and socially that we haven't really had to grapple with in the past, right? And so it takes time to figure some of those pieces out. When it comes to like the trans athletes in sports, my particular view on that is, if you've got, I don't think it matters that much because you see co-ed sports a lot with kids that are younger. I don't think it matters that much until you really get to that high school level. And when people start competing for scholarships, and opportunity, then I think that's where the line has to be drawn. And so if you're a trans athlete, like I think honestly, they need to just create their own group for that. Like as far as sports go, I think that would be probably the best way to solve it. Because even if somebody goes through like a full, like I don't even know how specific you would have to get to determine if you had a trans athlete, like let's say in swimming or something like that. Like at what, is there a certain testosterone threshold that they have to be below in order for it to be equitable? Is it like, I don't know how we get from A to B on that, right?
We tried that. They tried that in the Olympics last summer. Remember there was that boxer.
Yeah, but it goes back to men have higher bone density typically, not always, but
exactly.
typically.
That's the thing.
It's just it doesn't create a level playing field, right? And so, and guess what? I don't think that I think trans athletes should have an opportunity to be athletes and to do what they want to do.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think they should create categories for that, so that they can do those things. But yeah, I just like there's also a little bit of personal accountability in things that you have to accept if you make decisions to do something like that. Like if you want to make a change in your lifestyle, right? There's certain outcomes that are associated with that, and that's probably in my mind that should be one of them. But
decisions have consequences, and some of those consequences are good, and some of them are not so good. And and the proof to me in all of that, and just to that's not where I wanted or where I intended this discussion to go, but the proof to me that is effed up is you never see a female transitioning to be a male and then tries to go to get in the NBA.
Yeah.
It's always the other way around, right?
Yeah.
You have a male who's, I don't know, probably a below average in whatever it is he's doing when he's competing against all the males, and he transitions over and starts playing with the females, and all of a sudden he's super dominant, right? You never see it the other way around, and that to me is kind of the proof that this is BS.
Yeah.
All right. Now I don't know how you regulate that. I'm not going to get into that shit because that's politics and whatever, dude. For me and mine, you know, I'm just going to keep doing what I do. To kind of put a bow on this, though, man, when it comes to this DEI stuff, what I would encourage the listeners to do, if you're struggling with any of this, if you have questions on it, get a book and read it. Go on the internet, watch some YouTube videos. You know, try to educate yourself a little bit on what exactly it is. And it's really difficult. It's really difficult to find good source information that's not rooted in politics or some kind of decision or some kind of propaganda, right? It's very difficult. So whatever you're watching, whatever content you're consuming, take it with a grain of salt and look for an alternate point of view, and then find that happy ground in the middle. And that kind of goes for everything that we talk about on the show, right? Especially these topics that are, you know, sort of
can be divisive.
Yeah.
And they're kind of political hot buttons.
Well, and at the end of the day, man, for anybody who maybe is in one of these categories where you might feel marginalized in some way, wouldn't you feel really good about yourself if you just fucking earned it? Right?
Yeah, well,
if you just did the damn work and you made the cut and you met the standard, not because you have tits or not, but because you did the freaking work, right?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, totally, dude. And I think that it's like, you know, when you were talking about your example of the two African Americans in the cockpit, you know, the word privilege gets thrown around a lot today. And I think that there's a very clear difference between privilege and accomplishment. So, and one of the things that I saw, I think that makes it really easy is privileges. If you're on third base and you're acting like you're on third base because you got to third base, but you didn't, you just started at third base, that's privilege.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you hit a single and then stole second and third and you're on third base, that's accomplishment, right?
Yeah.
And that's the difference.
Very different.
And so, yeah, you know, I agree with you. Like, go out there and do the work. You know, obviously some of us have privilege in the sense that, you know, maybe we were born into a higher income household, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's barriers that, you know, other people face that we haven't had to face in our strive towards whatever it is that we want to do. It doesn't make that accomplishment any less valuable to you as an individual or important if you get there, right?
Yeah.
But there are people that have had to have had to fight through a lot more obstacles than we have. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's accomplishment as well. So,
well, I think that's a key point, man. And that was up here in the equity discussion, right? And that was kind of the second bullet point under that was acknowledge that people start from a different place and require different levels of support. Now, the challenge for us as a society is to figure out how to elevate those people without marginalizing someone else.
Yeah, one exercise that I saw on a video that I watched on this that I thought was actually kind of interesting was an equity. They called it like an equity walk or something like that. So they started everybody out on the same line, like 10 people, all in the same group or you know, in an organization. And they're like, all right, if you grew up in a two-parent household, take one step forward. You know, if you grew up in, and they listed all these things, right? Like they had like this list of like 10 questions, and I don't remember what all of them were, but like people would take a step forward if it applied to them. And when they got done, dude, you saw this huge range between people in the back and the people at the front.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a great way of showing, you know, hey man, here's where maybe you've had a little bit of an upper hand, right? Because maybe you had a little more stability in your household as a child growing up, right? Which can lead to better outcomes. You know, economic diversity and things like that. And so I thought it was that was really actually I thought was kind of an interesting exercise, not only because it showed, you know, the wide range between what people have faced individually in their own lives to get to basically the exact same place, but it also gives you as a group a better understanding of some of the things that people have had to overcome, right? The accomplishments that they've already made to get there. And so that was I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, no,
But
that's great, man. And to be able to highlight that is awesome. The challenge then becomes like, how do you bring up that back line and get them closer to the front line without making
yeah,
the front line feel like pieces of shit, or
yeah,
setting them back a step or two just right? Because ultimately what you end up with is somebody saying dumb shit like black people can't get on the internet and math is racist, right? And
yeah,
so we want to avoid that kind of stuff, right? We want
yeah,
to elevate those who need to be elevated, and there's got to be a way that we can, as a society, that we can help out those people in the back line, give them a
yes,
hand up, provide them with opportunity so
yep,
that they can then make a decision, right? Because if you don't have an opportunity, if you can't see the opportunity, you're not going to make the decision to either take it or not. But if I put an opportunity in front of you and go, hey man, uh, I recognize that you came up in a single parent household, you're below the poverty line. Maybe you grew up in a excuse me, maybe you grew up in a neighborhood where, gangs or violence was, the predominant pastime on the weekends. But if I give you an opportunity to say, hey man, I'm gonna let you go to that high school over there, we'll accept you to this high school. Well, now you have a choice, right? And who is the kid that we interviewed about a year and a half ago, from the Phoenix organization here? And
yeah,
this was him to a T, right?
yep,
Underprivileged, single parent house, actually no parent household. He grew up in a freaking home, right? Um, didn't have a lot of opportunities. It took one person to say, "Come on, dude, I'll give you a shot, right? I'll
yeah,
give you a shot." And he had a decision, and I remember him talking about that on the show
yeah,
here. He talked about it. Guys, you can go back and look it up. It was in about March of last year when this episode came out. And this kid said, I had to face all my friends and tell them I'm not going down this path anymore. I'm going to go to high school. And now the
yeah,
kid's fucking thriving, man.
yeah,
He's
totally,
running a business. I mean, he's a manager of a business. He's like doing great, right? But it
yep,
came down to that one decision. We provided him an opportunity. I say society offered him an
yeah,
opportunity, and he made the choice.
yep,
So we cannot discount that when as part of the calculus in this. Like there's a potential, I'd say a high likelihood at this point, that those opportunities exist. It comes down to individual decisions at that point.
yes, yeah,
And those people who decide, here's another example. I have a friend of mine, his kid, freaking stellar, phenomenal football player, right? He had the size, the build, the speed, he had the grades, he had everything. Got a scholarship to a college. He decided to not take the scholarship, and he opened his own landscaping business. That's a decision, right? Now, whether or not his business is doing any good that's a whole nother discussion, right? But he passed an opportunity and made a choice.
yeah,
And so now for the rest of his life, he can't use that argument anymore. He can't say, well, I was marginalized. They're picking
yeah,
on me because I'm this ethnicity, or I'm a male, or whatever. No, dude, he was given opportunities that other people were not. Other
yeah,
people in different races and different ethnicities and backgrounds and genders, right? He was
yeah,
given an opportunity that he passed on. So now you lose the argument.
yeah, yeah. Well, you definitely lost that opportunity. That's for sure.
Yep.
So yeah, I agree, man. And I think fundamentally too, at the end of the day, it's being able to, like, I think in some ways we've lost the ability just to have these conversations, and to stay calm and reasonable and logical in
Yeah.
them, like you and I are doing right now. By the way, your comment about we need to find ways. This goes back to policy about finding ways to create opportunity for people that have been marginalized. Spoken like a true liberal, man. I really appreciate that. That was good. I'm
Read in
proud
a
of you.
book. I read in a book. I
But
bat for no team
I'm
exclusively.
just
I'll
joking.
just say
Yeah.
that.
I'm a registered independent, so I'm right there
Yep.
with you. So yeah, but yeah, we just need to be able to have these conversations too, right? And I think that's a big piece of what DEI actually is supposed
Yeah.
to be too, right? It's just the opportunity to sit down and understand the varying backgrounds and where people have come from and the
Yeah.
challenges that they've faced and all that type of stuff, and then just be respectful of it. You
Yeah.
know, have an understanding and awareness around it, and be respectful of it. So,
Well, I think a good
anyways,
challenge, and I heard this on a podcast one time. The guy actually put out a challenge to his listeners, and he said, "Hey, when's the last time you sat down and had a good, lengthy conversation with a black man? When's the last time you sat down with a woman and just talked and found out what's going on in their life and what are their issues day to day? You know,
yeah,
go when you go pick your kids up from school, stand next to somebody in line waiting for the bell to ring, and just start a conversation with them and
dude,
find
that's
out
so
what's going on
important.
because
Yeah, well,
you'll
and
probably learn something."
yeah, well, and I'll tell you what, that reminds me of a time when I was the DO in the 308th, the civilian scheduler that I had, who was just fucking phenomenal. Like one of the best people that I've ever worked with was an African American. And this was, what time frame was this? Like 2014, 15
Mm-hmm.
ish. And I don't remember, but there was like a rash of um, young black men being killed by cops at that point in time. There were, I don't remember the number, but there were like 2 or 3 in pretty rapid succession that kind of happened across the country. And I remember sitting down and talking with him one morning, and I was just like, "Do you have to have that conversation with your son, like about being pulled over?"
Yeah.
Because that's something that I had never thought of in my life. That's something that I never thought I needed to
Yeah.
sit down and go,
Right.
"Hey, David, if you get pulled over, make sure that you got your hands out the window.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't talk back, don't be scary at all, don't do anything that would be seen as adversarial." Like
Yeah.
I've never had to have that conversation with one of my kids, and to sit here and listen to him talk about the conversations that he had to have with his son
Mm-hmm.
was just, it was like a punch in the gut almost to me, man. Because it's like 20 fucking 14, right? Like
Yeah.
I was so blind to that. And it was a huge, like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh moment for me to a certain extent, right? Just recognizing what other people, the conversations that another father who's a great friend and just like me in my
Yeah.
own eyes has to have with his son that are so different than anything that I have to think about or comprehend having with my own children.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
so dude,
I've got
there's a lot of value in that.
I've got examples too of conversations that I've had to have with my boys, um, because that pendulum swings. It swung really hard the opposite direction after, say, like that time frame all the way up to and including like the George Floyd stuff right around 2020, 2021. Things got hot, man, and it was very difficult to walk around as a single white male. Um, and we society threw this label out there, this cis male, right? Um, that was a hard time, and my kids are late teens, mid late teens at that point, and I had to have conversations with them as a white male. Boy, you've really got to watch it, man. I mean, you've got to walk on eggshells. Everything you say, everything you do, every booty slap in the locker room is going to be judged, man. And that's very difficult. And it's sad too that it goes to those extremes, isn't it? Um,
Yeah, it is.
and I blame I really I blame the media. I blame the press. I blame our politicians for keeping that conversation going the way that it is.
Yeah, they like to stoke the
Because,
fires.
man, I think if you take a cross section of just take a cross section of society, man, I really don't think that a lot of these things are giant problems
Yeah,
on a big scale, right? These are small isolated incidents that get elevated because of the evening news and because of the messaging that comes out of, whomever, and the propaganda and things like that. And that's a whole nother soapbox that I could get on that I'm going
sure.
to choose not to.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
because that
well, I think it
conversation is
goes,
it would end up going another hour. But
at the end of the day, it's just like what you say, right? Just be a good dude, man. Be respectful.
yeah,
Be aware of, other people's struggles.
yeah,
and just be a good person.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
just value people, stay curious,
yeah.
get
Manage
to
your
know
own
people,
expectations.
get to know people that are different than you.
Yeah.
Figure out, it can be very enlightening and illuminating, and
Yeah.
oftentimes what you find is you're not that fucking different.
No,
Like
not
there's a
really.
lot of similarities. So
But those differences are what make it interesting, right?
yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah, I mean that's sitting down. Like I've told you this, like sitting down in my workspace and talking to all 40 other dudes, and I ask them the same question. Like I ask them two questions: you work 8, you sleep 8. What do you do with the other 8? Because I'm curious. I might learn something. I might, oh, well, that's interesting. I didn't. Maybe I can notch out 30 minutes to go and do whatever it is you're doing. The other one is like, what's your end game? Is it based on a dollar amount? Is it based on a feeling? Is it based on an age? Like I legit want to know because I'm looking at that in a decade and a half. Even Tom Brady had to hang him up one day, and I want to know what that looks like for someone,
Yeah.
and I try to take notes and capture that. And because everybody's motivated by something different. Everybody comes from a different background, and what's important to Cass may not be important to Roscoe. So
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day too, just taking some time to be self-reflective, to be introspective, and understanding the messaging that you've been brought up with, challenging some of that. You may recognize that you do have some internal biases that
yeah,
maybe you don't like or that you disagree with, and you can be more aware of that, and you can start to put that stuff to
yeah,
bed.
yeah.
So
That's good shit, man.
yeah,
Anything else?
that's all I got, brother.
All right, be the change.
Be the one.
Thanks for flying with the Be One Change One podcast. If you got something out of this show, then be the one and share it in your circles of influence.
You can be our wingman through our website at www.b1change1.com. That's B and the number 1, change and the number 1.com.
We invite you to be the one and join our fighter squadron on social media at Be1 Change One on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can follow us at Paul Roscoe White on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, as well as Roscoe's website, www.paulroscoewhite.com.
You can email us from the website and please leave comments, share, and ask questions, or leave ideas of things you would like to discuss on future podcasts. Most importantly, be the one that helps us win the algorithm by leaving a review on whatever platform you're listening on.
Thanks for joining. Until next time, be the one.